All
Uh,
right.
Thanks, Matt. So, welcome to our session 14 of our occult science book study. I'm tuning in from Oklahoma, so happy to be with y'all again. So today we're covering paragraphs 9 through 25 in chapter 5. And if you have this fifth English edition of occult science, it's pages 261 to 281. So Steiner starts out this selection by just reiterating that the ascent to the supersensible starts or begins from waking consciousness rather than, being achieved through some kind of mediumistic or maybe psychedelic induced means. And so he starts going into examples that epitomize the exercises for this particular path of development. And I'll be saying this throughout the summary, but I think of this, you know, um, considering Steiner anthroposophy as a kind of expansion of Goethe's method as a method for intensification, like a kind of intentional intensification of the human organism. So the particular exercise he runs through is the taking of a symbolic mental picture into the center of one's consciousness and holding it there. So he says everything depends on the entire concentration of the soul upon one idea or thought picture placed by an act of will in the very center of consciousness. And he emphasizes multiple times that it's not so much the content that is significant for this intensification process, but the fact that one will have built up um, what one ends up meditating on through a process that he describes with the example of the rose cross meditation, where outside of meditation, one contemplates the chasteness of the plant world and the way in which plants unfold themselves in a kind of purity, at simplicity in comparison to um, human beings who, though they might be more perfect in some sense, with the capacity to move around and bring a kind of intentionality to one's life. We also have this sort of downside of the potential to err through being given over to the excess of passion and what have you. And so, but then there's this comparison. The next, I guess, step in this contemplation is just considering the redness of the rose. So there's this juxtaposition of the kind of chasteness of the green sap of the plant and the red blood, the passions of the human experience, and this imagination that of the rose as being a kind of symbol of the potential for human beings through a kind of process of self-cultivation to purify ourselves and I guess accord with a kind of providence or free necessity of our development. So this is the process outside of the actual meditation of the rose cross that really lends it efficacy. The fact that one would have gone through this whole exercise through their own like intentional willed activity. Um, and also he emphasizes that it's not just the thoughts that matter, but also the feelings that would accompany it. So the ideal is to like really live into this sequence of thoughts as a kind of moral experience, and that the feelings are especially what are efficacious. And it reminds me of the philosophy of freedom when he's talking about it's this through thinking, through calling forth these mental images, we have this capacity to generate certain kinds of feelings, and that's what ends up having this transformation of our character, but also this intensification of our capacity for thinking. Um, yes, and so the symbol derives its meaning through this process that is apart from the actual meditation experience. So he says, when you go to meditate and you imagine this black cross, which is a kind of symbol for the baseness of, the potential baseness of the human experience, with 7 red roses around it, representing the purification of the blood and the passions, that it's really, you don't want to have the thoughts still unfolding during that process, but rather just the echo of the feelings. And so you're just holding that image at the center of your consciousness. And he also emphasizes that it's important to, for this particular example, outside of meditation, to continue to repeat this process, this thought sequence, accompanied by the appropriate feelings, so that the feelings are still potent in the meditative experience. So yeah, again, the awakening is brought about by the way in which the single details have been put together to form the picture. For that, no prototype is to be found in the outer world. So that's his response to the potential critique of, well, you say that these symbolic pictures are supposed to be pictures that aren't derived from the sense perceptible world, and that's part of this intensification process, freeing ourselves from dependence on the sense perceptible world. But actually, the cross and the roses are things that you could have that you have actually derived from the sense perceptible world. But he emphasizes again that it's this process of in this particular example, contemplating the relationship between the human and the plant, and this potential for kind of intensification of our moral life that you can't actually derive from the sense perceptible world, that process. And then he emphasizes there's like a great variety of potential exercises that one could undertake. And it really just depends on the individual. And he mentions another form of exercise, which is more of a feeling meditation. And I remember when we were studying the philosophy of freedom, I was like thinking, and I think I even raised it in one of the sessions. I was like, what does he mean exactly by moral imagination? And it's much more clear to me now, especially with this example of the experience of joy that he describes as something that we can cultivate apart from just having it stimulated in us by our experience in the sense world, interacting with other human beings, and that kind of contemplation, through the activity of thinking and mental picturing of an experience that stimulated joy in us. For example, goodness of heart, where people do kind things for others. That a comprehensive idea could be derived from this experience, and that a feeling, we could generate this feeling in ourselves through a contemplation of this idea. And so again, it is not the mere idea that will awaken the inner faculties, but the prolonged surrender of the soul to a feeling that is not just due to a particular external impression. So he emphasizes along this path of development that it's really important to stay calm and collected, and to maintain this fundamental mood of patience and perseverance, which is, I think, also part of, this moral training that accompanies spiritual development, or the cultivation of supersensible perception. And so he says what begins to arise through these kinds of exercises is imaginative cognition, and he juxtaposes this with or contrasts this with objective cognition, which is just what we're familiar with, what the kind of knowing that is bound to the sense world, and the way in which the sense-bound intellect can work with what it has experienced in the sense world. And so for him, he says, imaginative perception or cognition is perception. It's kind of like symbolic cognition, a recognition of symbolic facts and beings that are not disclosed by the senses. I think, in comparison to other romantic thinkers, Steiner, especially with this development of higher forms of cognition, it's a more idiosyncratic idea of imagination, or more specific. At least that's how I encounter it. And so he compares this intensified wakefulness to sleep, but only to the extent that it is that we're not receiving sense impressions. And so, like when we're sleeping, we're not receiving sense impressions, and that's why we can fall asleep. Um, he says the soul comes to experience itself in its inmost true and independent being through this enhanced wakefulness. But then he goes on, so this is what I meant by the sort of idiosyncratic character of the way he characterizes imagination, at least here, that the symbolic pictures that one generates, they're not yet disclosing the actual spiritual world. And that what this phase of the development consists in mostly is self-perception. So self-perception through the activity and also self-perception through what is generated, the imaginations that are generated. And he says, and this is all for the sake of a kind of detachment from a dependence on the sense perceptible world for us to become conscious of ourselves as I beings. He says the detachment cannot be effected until man feels, now I am forming a thought picture by the use of forces that need no assistance from the senses or the brain. And as I was reading this, I was just thinking about, as we've discussed throughout the different cycles, people have mentioned Steiner's idea that in human development, there's a certain point that corresponds with the losing of the teeth and the gaining of uh, I guess, the adult teeth, and a kind of new capacity for thinking, where prior, like in childhood, as we're growing, we're bound up with the growth forces, and so we don't yet have this capacity to think. And so I think of I I don't know if this is the right characterization of this, but this is a kind of like further step where we are taking the thinking further and sort of reappropriating it as a growth force, but through our own, I guess, spiritual essence, directing it through our own spiritual essence. And then I also was reminded of the Goethean, or at least maybe it's an expansion of Goethe's ideas, that the animal's form, for example, is an expression of its doing, of its activity, and its organs are an expression of a kind of pre-phenomenal activity. And so that these meditation exercises, he says, are forming organs without which we wouldn't be able to be conscious in the spiritual world. We would just fall asleep. Um, yes. And so then the next step, he says, is that we need to be able to completely blot out everything we've generated. And if not, he says, oh yeah, so we need to be able to blot this out in order to then become porous to the actual spiritual world and to begin actually observing in the spiritual world. But at this point, we're still sort of weak, and so it requires a continual intensification of these powers. And he says if we didn't do that, we would be beholden potentially to what we observe in the spirit world, akin to the way in which, well, he just gives this example of like someone in the physical world being unable to like look away from an object. And I thought that's interesting, just considering the way Shenner also talks about, like during our time that we're supposed to be collectively crossing the threshold. And so there's just also corresponding with this, he said, a rise in nervousness and all kinds of, as we know today, a mental health crisis that I think, if this is true, must be connected with the fact that, people are having spiritual experiences and not realizing it, and also lack the kind of intensified thinking and control of thinking and will. But he says one thing we must not wipe out, which will accompany this, is a group of inner pictures that disclose our former incarnations. Um, And so one thing he says that transition, helps us transition through this process is that our sleep begins to transform through these exercises, and that we potentially begin to uh, have more a kind of wakeful experience of the spiritual world during sleep. And so this helps us gradually, as we, as one would be aspiring to strengthen their own thinking and control of thinking. But he says it's only transitional because you can't really, I guess, trust the veracity of what one would experience in the spiritual world while asleep. And then he goes on to say there's two more important inner experiences uh, that arise through this process, and one that I've kind of described already is this birth of the active spiritual ego, which he connects with the higher self, and then also there's this through this intensification, a kind of polarization. There's this emergence or awakening to, he even says, giving birth to this higher self. But then we become aware of the self that we already were, the like lower ego, which maybe corresponds to what he calls the double. I'm not sure. And it's very much, I think, depicted by Barfield in some of his novels on ancestral voice, and where he has this double that he has to deal with, that is this kind of everyday personality. He says he is, in some sense, confronted by the being within which he has until now been confined, feels he is temporarily outside what he has hitherto been accustomed to call his very own self. And then the third experience, he says, through these strengthened soul forces, there's this intensification as well of self-love and self-conceit that's always there, but begins to become a kind of force of nature that we need to contend with through a proportionate moral training alongside our spiritual development. And that if one is not to do this, then the lower self, especially if one has not cultivated logical thinking and discernment, the lower self can sort of hijack the higher self that is still weak, and distort one's experiences in the spiritual world. And so, yeah, Steiner emphasizes that this schooling is a safe path because of how, I guess, sort of strict, because of its emphasis on the cultivation of virtue. From this point of view, morality isn't just something additional added on to the cosmos by the human species, but is an essential aspect of it. There's a kind of ontic logos that is indexed to the good beyond being, and that we have to become adequate to that, and that the earth, our existence on the earth plane with the subjective cognition is a kind of schooling, and as he was emphasizing before, the post-Atlantean goal is to master life on earth, but it is also like a kind of moral schooling. Hmm. And then he goes into just the passage that we read. He only gets up to control of thought and control of will of the six basic exercises, but these exercises that would correspond, I think, more to the cultivation of the lower self, so that there is a readiness for what comes when the higher self is born. I'll stop there and go ahead, Max.
Hi, thanks, Ashton, for the summary. I'd like to pick up on a couple of points that you raised, and also introduce a few of my own, and also return to something that Matt said in the last session. And so I have kind of like a miscellaneous litany of things, but I hope they string together in a certain way. First, I'd like to pick up on the last thing you said about the good beyond being, and the relationship between that, like becoming adequate to the good beyond being, and how that connects to the moral development of humans. And this, I think, ties into a question that has come up before, but you also introduced it at the beginning of your summary, when you talked about the difference between, well, you were summarizing Steiner, the difference between humans and plants, for instance, and then you can think of animals as intermediary beings. the difference between humans and plants is that plants basically, so also just to bring in another point that you made um, about the way that we can develop capacities for cognition. And it's in fact one word that is used for the capacity to perceive something or to cognize it is just is the word idea. An idea is basically a capacity for the perception of instances or instantiations or embodiments of that idea. So in order to like establish a relationship to the good beyond being, we need some kind of idea of the good. And so this harkens back to Plato, of course. And the idea of the good, it starts out, or at least presented as extremely esoteric philosophical concept. But as in so many things, we miss the highest things because they're too close to us. So we don't see them, we look past them. The idea of the good is really like if you want to, we basically wager an idea of the good by how we live our lives. So if you want to understand somebody's working idea of the good, watch the decisions that we make. The reason we're all here today, convened here today, is because we actually perceive in light of our idea, in light of our idea of the good, that this is the best thing that we could be doing. Plants and animals, to the same, by the same token, don't have the problem that we do, which is we are actually free as humans to elaborate our ideas of the good and strive to perfect them. Plants have a perfect idea of the good already instilled in them. Animals have the same, we call that instinct. In plants, we call it sort of the forces of growth. And just watch how the sunflowers, the heliotropism of sunflowers, when they follow the sun, these can become symbols for what we have to accomplish consciously or deliberately. And as we know, like all kinds of adventitious circumstances can conspire to distort our ideas of the good so that we begin to perceive, so that things begin to seem good to us that are not in fact good to themselves. But that's exactly the process that, by which a human being can develop him or herself, take his or her own development in hand, is to attempt to perfect and to purify our idea of the good. This brings me to a conversation I had yesterday. It came up in conversation. He said, the people that I get along with are ones that don't feel sorry for themselves or don't try to kind of discharge their, or like try to seek validation from others all the time. And I understood what he was saying and I largely agreed with it, but it got me thinking, like, because the way he presented it as a sort of dichotomy almost. And of course, I thought of the line from the Matthew Gospel where he says about the sheep and the goats shall be separated them one from another, as the shepherd divided the sheep and the goats. And he shall set the sheep on the right hand, but the goats on the left. And so on. I'm sure most people are familiar with that passage. But the way he presented the dichotomy sort of, and so it got me thinking about that. And then I realized there does seem to be a fundamental dichotomy. And I wouldn't go so far as to say, it's not possible to get along with somebody who doesn't recognize this need for, as a human being, like part of what constitutes being human is to take in hand our own development and kind of like God has in a certain way delegated to us to carry forward these corners of the cosmic process. But I'm sure everyone encounters people who are completely uninterested in that task, don't recognize the value of it, have other things that they would prefer to spend their time with. And so this seemed to me something, actually, I know Steiner in more than one place actually alludes to the coming separation, the kind of cleaving in twain of humanity as such. And it's, as I was thinking these thoughts through, that really did seem to be one element of it. The last thing that I would just want to say is in a certain way to tie this back to Matt's point. He was, I think, in the spirit of Whitehead, suggesting that somehow the Godhead himself is not complete, somehow needs development, that what happens in the cosmos is somehow also enriching the Godhead. And then that contrasts with a more classical view, which is God is by definition perfectly complete in himself. And it's a contradiction in terms to imagine some kind of evolution or development. Godhead. And I was reflecting on that a little bit, and neither one of them by itself entirely sits right with me. And I was trying to reflect on how it might be possible to thread the needle. And something I came upon that seems true to me is that um, when so imagine Godhead who really like wills the best for us, you know, in a kind of has love for his creatures and his creation. Um, this can be to behold the success of another being, especially one that for whom you're to a certain extent responsible. I picture like parents with children, or anybody that you love, really to see them succeed. This is extraordinarily enriching, and at the same time, it doesn't really involve a change in you. And so this, you know, as I was thinking through these thoughts, it occurred to me that that's, you know, it looks one way from one aspect and another way from another aspect. But that seemed to me a way to kind of capture the whole situation through a metaphor that we're more or less familiar with in our own experience. All right, I'll stop there. Thank you all.
Thanks, Max. Lots of good stuff in there. Yeah, you know, I regarding what you said about the difficulty in getting along with those who do not recognize this necessity of taking our own development into our hands. I've found that like this um going through Steiner's cosmology again and this just whole narrative of like the fall and the rebellion and things like this, and this very complex, diverse picture of different humans coming back to Earth at different times, and these meddling spirits that I find for me, like when I'm relating to someone who is more inclined to point to something outside of them as the reason why they are not, what they could be. That 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 especially when they're people that I've known for a while that are dear to me, and that they're seeing, even though we don't have a lot in common intellectually, that there's a kind of like feeling relationship there, some kind of like soul or maybe karmic relationship that I guess I just feel this narrative is helpful to in the way of I guess trusting that there's a kind of larger process at work, and not trying not to fault others too much for that. And anyway, this isn't the most articulate expression of that, but I just find this narrative helpful in finding some, I guess, peace in relation to folks where there's that kind of difference.
Steiner's often emphasizing the fact that the esoteric teachings, far be it that they take us away from life, they should actually make us more equipped to deal with life and more able to encounter life on its own terms. And I think what you were suggesting is also speaks directly to that. People that have some sense. I know it's basically not. It's people that lack a recognition of their own moral and spiritual agency, and sort of feel at the mercy of everything that happens to them. Foremost of which is their own psychology. It's just it's a sorry state, and I don't mean as though like I'm reprimanding them or something. I mean out of sort of pity. Like it's a pity because it fails to realize what is actually possible for us as humans in this lifetime.
Yes. Yeah. Amen. Go ahead, Rosemary.
I wanted to share that I've been working with a lot of these steps for more than 40 years, way before I encountered Steiner. And rereading it this morning, getting ready, I just was so grateful to him for painstakingly laying this out. Years, way before the big wave of humanity was really ready to take it up and accomplish in the right way what he was doing. And I read this same material last summer with a group of anthroposophists, and they too are always realizing they did get some of it, they missed this. We need to get realigned on that. And helping each and reflecting with each other is also very illuminating in sticking with the path and making progress. I was in a spiritual community for 10 years with frequent group meditations, and people would fall asleep all the time, not because they were sleep deprived, but because it really did trigger them into another world that they weren't ready to stay awake in. So I just wanted to say, years from now, you may be grateful coming back and having this clear description as you're finding your way through the new worlds. I have achieved some of these steps, like seeing myself, understanding the two, being able to look at my two selves pretty clearly. I'm also able to have continuity of consciousness in sleep, not all the time, but I can attest that it's possible. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Rosemary. I have not been at this as long as you have, but it's been a delightful experience rereading this and just like experiencing a deepening, of what I thought I understood. And also, like as you described, for me, especially what we just read, I find it really helpful for understanding some of the what felt like incomprehensible experiences, very difficult experiences I've had after like difficult psychedelic experiences. And yeah, Matt, go ahead.
Thanks, Ashton. Hi, everyone. Angus is dealing with the elements and might lose electricity, and I'm dealing with a couple of cats whose territorial instincts are getting the best of them. So if I need to step up and break it up, that's why. So a few things. I wanted to respond to Max, who brought up this process theological view of the divine. And yeah, I struggle with this too, and there is a needle to be thread here somewhere. I think of, the way in which like the father can't become the father until the son is born. And is that new identity that is gained by the parent a change in the nature of the parent, or is it just that the son is being born and then we have a new perspective? I'm not sure. I think there might be a deeper change there, in the sense that, the father cannot become the father until the son is born. And, Whitehead tries to thread this needle by distinguishing between the primordial nature of God and the consequent nature of God, and would say that the primordial nature is eternal and perfect, but deficient in actuality and also unconscious, and that God only can become conscious through a relational world process. And so perfection is granted, and yet the consciousness that comes through reflection, in the same way that we human beings initially need the physical body to become conscious. It may be that the divine is, if not moving from total unconsciousness to consciousness, is deepening consciousness through the evolution of the world process, something like that. And then I wanted to remark a bit on the parallels that I see in what Steiner is up to here, and Hegel's phenomenology of spirit, this process of moving from what Hegel calls sense certainty, which is, our perception of the particulars of the everyday world. And as we begin to reflect upon the role that our own thinking plays in the constitution of that and the ordering of that perceptual world, we gradually gain a sense of what Hegel calls self-certainty, right? So we move from sense certainty, the sense certainty of a kind of naive empiricism, out of which science eventually grows as the study of phenomena, to a kind of self-certainty as we recognize the role of our own understanding in shaping and ordering those perceptions. And I think there's a very clear parallel track that Steiner is following here in his account of our spiritual development through these various exercises. Hegel is usually understood as talking about a historical process. Steiner has that historical sort of collective process as well, of course. Hold on, I have to break this up. Come on, guys. And then also the parallel, actually a distinction of between what Steiner is up to and what Kant discusses in terms of these two stems of human cognition for Kant, sensibility and understanding. Kant would describe sensibility as passive. It's what's given to us. We have no role in bringing about our sensations of the external world, whereas the understanding is active. It has spontaneity with it. Hold on a second. You guys, come on. Sorry, guys. And this made me think of the way in which in Kant, like these two capacities can't be really reconciled. Sensibility as passive, understanding as active. Kant does talk about reason, which is also active, but he says reason can't develop knowledge of the real world, right? Because it's, for Kant, untethered from the givenness of the sensory world. So for Kant, without the givenness of the sort of material of our cognition that would be external to us, we can't claim to have knowledge of anything. And what Steiner is suggesting is that through the cultivation of imagination, we come to recognize, just as I was describing Hegel realizing, that we can produce the content of our own experience through our imagination, and that this can be quite dangerous. And this is why Steiner emphasizes the moral dimension of this, and also the simple logical exercise of ordering our thinking. If we haven't cultivated a sense of ethical responsibility and a sense of ordered logical thinking, when we develop this imaginative capacity to generate the content of our own experience, we could spin off into fantasy very easily, and also become very conceited and full of pride and feel like we've created this new world, that we can just journey off and leave this world, the physical world, and other people behind. And so this transition, this entry into the spiritual world through imaginative cognition is such a crucial step that is very delicate. And it's going beyond the Kantian threshold in a way, as I like to refer to it. And, you know, it's the doorway into the spiritual world, and it comes through a kind of self-perception, as Ashton was saying. And the delicacy of distinguishing between what is our own creation and what is the objective spiritual world becomes the key feature at this stage. And I know, Steiner is going to go on in this chapter to help us uncover the means of distinguishing that. And, Lucifer and Ahriman are fully present here already, not yet named, but their temptations are present here. So yeah, a few thoughts to share. Sorry about the interruptions.
Thanks, Matt. As I was reading this part, having just read the cosmology, the evolutionary cosmology, it was just really, I guess, top of mind, like this description of the Luciferic rebellion and then the kind of recapitulation of it, and how like this process of initiation is like the if this narrative, just working with this narrative is the providential transformation of the rebellion into potential good. Angus?
Hi, nice to join you here. I just want to develop a little bit more a thought that Ashton brought up in his intro, the connection with the philosophy of freedom. Take us through a little bit of a journey through ideas on ancient initiation that he details in other books, and connect them to what's been said in this chapter. And I might make a few deviations along the path there, but that's what I've got traced out in my mind. So if I take us all the way back to chapter 1 of the philosophy of freedom, I just read the couple of sentences where he talks about this region of the soul. He says, the attempt is made to show that there is a view of the being of man which can support his other knowledge, or his other knowledge, and furthermore to indicate that this view, to indicate with this view a full justification is one for the idea of freedom of the will, if only the soul region is first found in which free willing can unfold itself. So that's the first one. And then the second one, just half a page down. For the way of picturing things which underlies this book, such an answer would be only a seeming one. No such fixed and final answer is given, but rather a region of experience of the soul is indicated in which, through the inner activity of the soul itself, the question is answered anew in a living way at any moment that the human being needs it. And this the production of this region of the soul, this creation of the region of our soul, or finding of this region in our soul at the same time, is for me central in the essence of these exercises that he talks to us about here in chapter 5. And somebody brought up the 6 exercises. And if you consider those, what are they? They all require the will to be performed. So they in themselves are like by themselves are, it's like an amplification of this statement. It's about bringing your own individual will into the process, and hopefully that emphasis will become like a little bit more clearer after I've talked a little bit about ancient initiation. So if you look at the mysteries and the initiation process that happened there, we still have the eyes are still a lot weaker than we are used to, than the current experience we have of them. And the way Steiner describes it is that what happens is we are filling the astral body with images, and there's also an element of moral purification that's going on, hugely important in this process. And then when the to be initiated is sufficiently mature, then so he is lifted out of his physical body so that the astral forces can shape so that this new being has etheric sense organs. So a spiritual sight or a clairaudience is developed in that person, and that happens over a 3-day period. And this is very different from the type of initiation that we're talking about today. This is it's like a long, extended process. It's like through time, which is one of the reasons why it's like these acts of will that are at the heart of these exercises. There's I think there's less of an emphasis on certainly in this in chapter 5 here, but the rhythmic nature of these exercises also become, it's like a key ingredient, so that you'll see him recommending in other lectures that it's like not only do you try to so that you meditate, but even at the same time of day, and it is this rhythmic process which helps for the astral body to create these etheric organs, so that this awakening happens. And when but here, so like as a modern man, what we are using the I forces. We haven't got a guru. It's like leading this process. We are responsible for generating this content of the astral body, so that it can, like over a long period of time, awaken, develop these etheric organs. And one of the major things that can get in the way of no, so I won't take that yet. So when he emphasized this aspect of symbolism, my understanding, or one way of looking at why this symbolism is so important, is because we are actually, in a way, we are reversing the knowledge process. Usually it's like we see with our senses, it's like we're connecting the concepts that already exist in us, and so like we gain knowledge of the world. With symbolism, we're doing the exact opposite, where it's the creation versus it's the knowledge process in reverse, but it's all come out of something that is not determined by the outside world. It's come out of so like the holiest of holies, so like the inner, the I being, which is why he will recommend that you take, you don't allow so like thoughts that crop up in your mind as topics of meditation. He'll say, so, pick up, it might be the Bible, it might be the Upanishads, it's like some sort of source of wisdom. Take a sentence that you might not know and then repeatedly work with that content. And so that becomes like the content of your mind. You have chosen it. There's nothing, it's absolutely free. There's nothing in the world that has obliged you to do it other than your own pure will. So I think it's important for me to emphasize that aspect. And when we begin to, I wanted to come to morality as well. This purification aspect of what is going on there is, as we begin to wake up to have, I really like the way you said it, Ashton, in the beginning. So we're having these unconscious spiritual experiences all the time. But if we don't clean ourselves up morally, then we don't know what's coming in. We feel the effects of it, and it's often when we it's very easy when we use the word spirit or spiritual, think of automatically good, but it quite clearly isn't. That's the essence of what Steiner is saying. The spiritual world is something real, but we as individuals have to wake up as to, so what elements of those spiritual world do we want to allow to live consciously within us. And one of the ways that I imagine this for myself as like a picture that I use is, so there's just like, there's a big blackness. I feel so like some Schopenhauerian in that sense. There's this blackness, there's this veil, but that is the source of absolutely everything that exists. And as your experience of soul begins to deepen, the immense richness of that nothingness, of that darkness, is actually something that it fills you in an immensely positive way. And then when you begin to have these like deeper experiences of this infinite living in you, you're like you're constantly aware of the finite that's all around you, and it's like to a certain extent determining you. But when this infinite begins to come as an experience, not a full-blown on experience, but it's like these moments, these intuitions, these hunches, these sensings that something infinite is always living within you, and it's always living within everyone else. You begin to recognize it in it's like in the Bible, and obviously I'm going to read something very quickly from the Upanishads where they describe it. And actually, perhaps I'll read that now. So this is from the Kena Upanishad, and I might have even quoted these exact lines before in one of our other sessions when we dealt with another book. Kena Upanishad: what cannot be spoken with words, but that whereby words are spoken, know that alone to be Brahman, the spirit, and not what people here adore. What cannot be thought with the mind, but that whereby the mind can think, know that alone to be Brahman, the spirit, and not what people adore. What cannot be seen with the eye, but that whereby the eye can see, know that alone to be Brahman, the spirit, and not what people here adore. And this sense of this infinite that has created, you realize that you've been using that. It's like a light version, if I could put it like that, to create these symbolic pictures in your mind. But when you've worked with that consistently over a period of time, you begin to recognize, because you've been working with creating symbolic pictures, that some things come to you and they come pre-packaged. They come, it's like there's a whole picture. It's a glimpse of something, or it can be a word, or it's like a completion of a thought, or something that extends a thought that you had beyond something that you were capable of understanding before. And in that sense, where these new pictures come from, where these new thoughts, where these new words or sentences come from, it's come from beyond you, but it's also come from within you at the same time. So you'll connect it to the Bible is the multiple statements in John where Christ talks about God is in me and I am in God. So this seeming contradiction, but both are true at the same time. And then finally, so the point that I wanted to come to right at the end here is, once this becomes a stronger living experience of this infinite that lives within you, you've still always got your body, which is also a source of thoughts and feelings and pictures and all of these type of things. That might be the lectures to priests, but it might be somewhere else. Steiner makes clear that, or he identifies this is what St. Paul meant with the thorn that we all have in us. Our body is a useful tool, but it will always bring us back to this determined nature, and this determined finite nature, whereas we are gradually creating this region of our soul where we are experimenting, where we are experiencing our infiniteness. I hope some of that came across clearly.
It certainly did. I'm really appreciating how, each of our reading cycles have been very rich, but I feel like this one has brought out a lot more of each individual's own experiences. And there was something else I was just about to say, but it just slipped my mind. So give it to Lorenzo. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I wanted to make 2 points. I'll try to be brief. First one, I find there is a connection between the way that the images that are apt to be meditated upon are built. When Steiner says that even though they are taken from our sensible experience, what is important is that the relationship between the images is something that is new and original, and this attention to the connection between the words, between the images, made me think about the importance of the connection of different words and to the definition of poetry. Steiner says that the composition of these images is not to be seen as a scientific endeavor, okay? Probably because we could see it as an artistic endeavor. And I was reading Barfield's book, Poetic Diction, which revolves around the nature of poetry and its relationship to consciousness. And he brings this very important quote from Maupassant, and Maupassant himself was quoting Horatius, the Latin poet, saying that the canon of classical beauty in poetry resides in the finding the right connections, the right combinations of words, because it's always what is between one word and the other that can reveal the secret soul of the words and give us their evocatory power. So I think that it's interesting to think about the art of creating these images as poetry, and we can see that these images are really poetical and they really speak to us and they inflame our emotions quite well, because I think the technique is just the same as poetry. And yes, I think this is interesting. Another thing I wanted to say, relating back to what Ashton said at the beginning, he said that that China says that you cannot awaken your higher organs of perception, but going through the wake state. And then Ashton, you said, so it's not like you could go there via psychedelics or stuff like that. And I kind of disagree here, because I think that when Steiner says that you can only go to the higher states through wakefulness, well, that's, I think, goes to be contrasted to, as opposed to, let's say, through sleep or through dream or through death. I mean, you can only raise to a higher state of consciousness from this wakeful state. But I don't think that it is opposed to psychedelics. Of course, they were few and far less known and maybe even less powerful than today's psychedelics. So Steiner maybe could not really experiment with those. But I think that however delicate and riskful can be working with psychedelics, because of course they are pushing your organism. It's not just something that is coming out of your exercise, out of your meditation. Anyway, we should not disregard them, because I think they are really a great tool that we have nowadays. And if one can use them with some discipline, I think it can be productive. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorenzo. Yeah, I agree. I think they can disclose super sensible realities, but also, yeah, like, as you said, discipline, and they do introduce, I think, something additional. But anyway, Karsten, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll try to be very brief. So I was just thinking about, we have all these dichotomies. So we started out, Max, talking about the relationship between the Godhead, the oneness, and the manifold, the sons of God. And Angus was touching upon the concept, the relationship between the infinite and the finite. And I also think there's I accept that this is something we have to will. So there's this discovery of the action principle within yourself, which is also the infinite. in a sense, but also there's something you would say that has to do with surrender, or this concept from Christianity with not my but thy will be done, that somehow must be a part of the picture. The understanding that this is not only a process we are involved in for the sake of ourselves as individuals, as different individuals, as finite beings, but we are part of we're all part of a whole, a greater picture. So we need to also to strike this balance between this being something that we want, we desire, we will, and we are active in, but also something that we surrender to, and this element of, you could say, grace that is needed. You have to do your own thing to acquire these states of knowledge or consciousness, but also you have to depend on something else coming to meet you, which I think the beautiful word grace describes that very well. So I just wanted to put that into the picture as well.
Amen. Thank you, Carson. Very important. Bye, Lorenzo. James, did you want to share before we close out?
Yes, I'll make this real quick. Yesterday I was watching something on Wittgenstein and his picture theory of language. And then I was reading over, getting ready, and it was talking about, Steiner was talking about man, the word man, M-A-N, and all of a sudden I had this experience of soul, that man, matter, anima, soul, numen, spirit, and I experienced what really intuition is. And that was a grace, I guess, given to me. But that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, James. Anna, did you want to say something before we close out?
Yes, thank you. Just very quickly, that first of all, just these things with drugs and that yes, I can understand, and I can see that that can be a way to get spiritual experience. It is a way to receive spiritual experience, but it's also very important to know that it can be very dangerous, and to take shortcuts can be dangerous, and that there is a point in going the whole way, so to say, and to step the path, because it's building up things within us, like people have been saying before, like cultivating organs and things like that. So yeah, I just wanted to say that, because it's easy to get lost otherwise, and it's not always about going somewhere quickly. It's very much about threading the way and getting experience while one is doing that. And just about that as well, someone was talking about the differences in how to know what is fantasy and what is real spiritual experiences. And to know that, one way to know the difference is to actually thread the path and to receive more and more experiences, because the more we practice and the more we do, the more we get these experiences, and then we actually more and more we learn to see the difference between what is real spiritual experiences and what is not. That is my experience of that. So yeah, I just wanted to share that. And in real spiritual experiences, usually is a certain quality that's quite distinctive from other experiences. And you actually know and you can feel the difference. But of course, it depends on what we're talking about, and that's too much to go into now. But yeah, so yeah, that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Karen, nice to hear from you. Welcome to the group. I haven't seen you here before. Maybe you've been here, but thank you for sharing that perspective.
I'm quite new to the group, but thank you for letting me be here.
Of course. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Matt just posted in the chat the next reading. It's pages 281 to 300 in the edition that we have, or chapter 5, paragraphs 26 to 38. Well, see y'all next week. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.